The night was dense with mist, the rain pouring relentlessly as it drummed on the pavement. Megan Parker, her sleek umbrella barely covering her, stepped briskly through the bustling streets of New York. The city that never slept was unusually quiet in the storm, the usual chaos subdued by the downpour. Megan's heels clicked against the wet pavement, each step purposeful, every motion calculated. She had just won another case, a high-profile victory that would keep her name at the top of every legal publication for weeks to come. Yet, the celebration was short-lived. It was always short-lived for Megan. Success was expected, not savored. There were always more battles to fight. As she neared the subway entrance, her eyes caught an unusual sight beneath the weak flicker of a street lamp. A woman sat huddled against the cold stone of the building, soaked to the bone, her arms wrapped protectively around a baby. The tattered blanket barely shielded the child from the storm. Megan paused, her pulse quickening. For a fleeting second, she felt the familiar urge to walk on. She had done it before, walked past the broken and homeless, hardened by years of focus on her career. They weren't her responsibility, and stopping wouldn't change anything. But something about this scene held her in place. She approached cautiously, the wind whipping at her coat as she tried to get a better look. The woman's face was pale, eyes hollow and distant, as if she had long given up hope. The baby stirred beneath the blanket, its small cries barely audible over the relentless rain. Megan's heart clenched, a rare emotion for someone who prided herself on her cold, logical mind. Without thinking, she crouched down, her voice breaking through the sound of the storm. "Do you have anywhere to go?" The woman looked up, startled by the sudden presence. She blinked through the rain, clearly not expecting anyone to stop. Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The exhaustion on her face told Megan all she needed to know. Megan sighed, glancing at the small child whose innocent blue eyes peeked from the drenched fabric. Before her mind could rationalize her actions, she reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet, extracting a shiny black credit card. "Here," she said, offering it to the woman. "Take this. Find a place for you and your baby to stay for the night. Get out of this rain." The woman hesitated, staring at the card with disbelief, her fingers shaking as she slowly reached out. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice weak and fragile. Megan shook her head, standing up and pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders. "Don't thank me. Just make sure you stay safe." The woman cradled the baby closer, nodding as tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. Megan turned without another word, her heart pounding, already distancing herself from the encounter. She had done her part. It was a momentary lapse of her usual self-control, an act she would forget by morning. There were other matters demanding her attention. Cases to prepare, meetings to attend, a life to get back to. But as she walked away, her mind wasn't on her career or her next victory. Her thoughts lingered on the woman and her baby, cold and alone in the night, and a small, unfamiliar ache settled in her chest. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the city remained wrapped in the cold aftermath of the rain. Megan Parker sat at her desk, the sun barely creeping through her office window, casting long shadows across the room. Her mind was already racing through the day's agenda, and the stack of legal documents in front of her served as a welcome distraction. The night before, with its unexpected encounter, felt distant, almost surreal. Megan didn't dwell on it. She couldn't afford to. Her work demanded precision, focus, and a level of detachment that she had spent years perfecting. Emotions were distractions, and she had learned early on how to bury them beneath layers of professionalism. The world wasn't kind to those who showed weakness, and in her world, corporate law, it could devour you whole. But as she sipped her coffee, her mind betrayed her. A fleeting image of the woman and her baby, shivering under the thin blanket, surfaced. Megan brushed it aside. It was a small act of charity, nothing more. People like that slipped through the cracks all the time, and Megan couldn't save them all. It wasn't her responsibility. Her phone buzzed, jolting her back to the present. It was Alana, her assistant, who walked in with an urgency that caught Megan's attention. "Megan, there's a detective here to see you," Alana said, her voice tinged with concern. "He says it's important." Megan's brow furrowed. She wasn't accustomed to unexpected visits from the police. "Send him in," she replied, her voice steady, though her curiosity was piqued. A few moments later, a man in a dark suit stepped into her office, his expression serious but polite. "Ms. Parker, I'm Detective Harris. I'm here about some suspicious activity on your credit card." Megan's heartbeat quickened, but she remained calm. "Suspicious activity?" she echoed, motioning for him to sit. "There must be a mistake." The detective nodded, pulling out a small notepad. "I'm afraid not. There have been several large purchases made using your card in the past few days. Electronics, high-end furniture, things that don't seem to fit your usual spending patterns." Megan felt a sudden tightness in her chest. Her thoughts flickered back to the previous night, the soaked woman and her baby. Could it be? No, she had only given the card for temporary shelter. "I did give my card to someone, but only to help them out," she said, her voice faltering slightly for the first time. "A woman with a child. She looked like she needed help." Detective Harris leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "And you didn't think to monitor how it was being used?" Megan paused, realizing the flaw in her logic. Of course, she hadn't checked. The moment she handed over the card, she had mentally distanced herself from the situation. "I didn't expect her to use it for anything more than a hotel room. I didn't think." Her voice trailed off. The detective studied her carefully, then spoke again. "We've tracked the purchases to a few locations. If you'd like, we can investigate further, but I'll need more details about the woman." Megan's mouth went dry. She didn't know anything about her. No name, no background, just a fleeting moment of sympathy on a rain-soaked street. "I don't have much," she admitted. "It was an impulse. I didn't even ask for her name." Harris nodded, though Megan could see the hint of skepticism in his eyes. "That's all right. We'll do what we can. But I suggest you keep a closer eye on your finances from now on." The detective left shortly after, leaving Megan alone with a mixture of frustration and unease. She hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated that her brief moment of kindness could spiral into something more complicated. The day was supposed to have been routine, another step towards solidifying her position at the top of her game. Instead, she found herself distracted. Her mind pulled back to the streets of New York and the haunting image of that woman clutching her baby. Megan stood, pacing her office as if trying to shake off the feeling. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't work-related. It was her bank, confirming yet another purchase on her card. She stared at the message, her jaw tightening. Something wasn't right. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she grabbed her coat, her mind already racing through the possibilities. She needed answers. If this woman had taken advantage of her, Megan was going to find out. And if there was something more sinister at play, she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. Determination burned in her chest as she stepped out of her office, leaving behind the comforting world of law and order for something far more unpredictable. Megan strode through the crowded streets of Manhattan, her mind racing as fast as her feet. The rain had stopped, but the city was still damp, the air thick with the residue of the storm. Every step she took only fueled her growing frustration. How had she allowed herself to be caught up in this? She had no time for distractions, yet here she was, on the trail of a woman she barely knew, driven by the gnawing feeling that something was deeply wrong. She arrived at the first location Detective Harris had mentioned, a high-end electronics store on the edge of Soho. The bright lights and polished floors inside clashed sharply with the grimy streets outside, but Megan barely noticed. She marched to the counter, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "I need to speak with your manager," she said, her voice clipped, her patience thin. The cashier blinked, startled by her tone, and quickly paged the manager. When he appeared, a tall, thin man with a tired expression, Megan wasted no time. "A purchase was made here using my credit card. It wasn't me. I need to know who used it." The manager frowned, glancing at the system. "Ma'am, we can't just—" "I'm a lawyer," she cut in, her voice icy with authority. "If you don't cooperate, I'll have a subpoena on your desk by the end of the day." His face paled, and he nodded quickly, motioning for her to follow him to a back office. Inside, the room was dimly lit. filled with monitors showing footage from various cameras in the store. The manager tapped a few keys on the keyboard, pulling up the date and time of the transaction in question. "There," he said, pointing to the screen. Megan leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she watched the grainy footage. A figure came into view, a woman, but it wasn't Kate. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a man, tall, wearing a dark hoodie, his face mostly obscured. He moved quickly through the store, selecting expensive items far beyond what Kate would ever have needed. Megan's stomach tightened with unease. "That's not her," Megan muttered, more to herself than to the manager. The man on the screen moved with purpose, confident, like he knew exactly what he was doing. It was clear he hadn't stolen the card by chance. He had been waiting for an opportunity, waiting for someone like Kate to cross his path. Megan's mind reeled with the implications. Had Kate been working with him? Or had she been a victim in this too? "Do you recognize him?" Megan asked, her voice tense. The manager shook his head. "No, but we've had a few complaints about fraudulent purchases recently. It's possible this guy is involved." Megan stared at the screen for another long moment before straightening. "I need a copy of this footage. Now." The manager hesitated but nodded, quickly transferring the video to a USB drive. Megan took it, her fingers gripping it tightly as if it could offer the answers she so desperately needed. As she stepped out of the store, the cold air hit her face, but her mind was burning with questions. If Kate wasn't responsible for the purchases, who was this man? And why had he used her card? There was more to this story than she had anticipated, and she wasn't about to walk away now. Megan's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Alana. "Megan, you have a meeting with the board in an hour." "I'm busy," Megan snapped, cutting her off. "Reschedule it." Alana hesitated on the other end of the line. "But they've already." "I said reschedule it." Megan's voice was sharp, more forceful than she intended, but she didn't care. She hung up before Alana could respond, stuffing the phone back into her coat pocket. Her world of meetings, contracts, and legal briefs seemed distant, irrelevant in the face of this new mystery. She had to find Kate. The next stop was the shelter Kate had mentioned. It wasn't far, tucked between two dilapidated buildings that looked like they hadn't seen a renovation in decades. The air inside was warm, thick with the smell of worn fabric and the quiet hum of people seeking refuge. Megan approached the front desk, her gaze steely as she locked eyes with the woman seated there. "I'm looking for someone. A woman named Kate. She has a baby. I need to speak with her." The receptionist raised an eyebrow, glancing down at her register. "We don't give out information on our residents." Megan gritted her teeth, leaning forward slightly. "Listen, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to talk to her. It's important." The woman studied her for a moment before sighing. "Look, we've got a lot of people in and out. I can check, but I can't promise anything." Megan waited, her impatience growing with every second. Finally, the receptionist returned with a slow shake of her head. "No Kate here. No woman with a baby that fits your description either." "Sorry." A wave of frustration washed over Megan. She wasn't sure whether to believe the woman or not, but it didn't matter. She was hitting dead ends at every turn. As she left the shelter, the city's sound seemed muted, her mind racing with possibilities. She had been so sure that Kate would be there, so certain that she would get the answers she needed. Now, all she had was more questions. And that shadowy figure from the footage was still out there, somewhere. The rain began to fall again, light at first but soon picking up strength, matching the storm brewing in Megan's mind. She pulled her coat tighter and began walking again, determination building in her chest. Kate was out there, and Megan would find her, one way or another. Megan sat in her car, staring blankly at the rain as it splattered across the windshield. Her frustration simmered just below the surface, her fingers gripping the steering wheel tightly. The shelter had been another dead end, another wasted effort. She had no time for this, no time to chase shadows or play detective. Yet here she was, her career on hold as she tracked down a woman she'd helped on a whim. She let out a sharp breath, turning the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, but Megan's thoughts were miles away. There had to be a way to find Kate, if Kate was even her real name. She remembered the desperation in the woman's eyes, the tremble in her voice. Megan had been certain she was telling the truth. Now, doubt gnawed at her. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, expecting to see another reminder about the rescheduled meeting. But it wasn't. It was a notification, another charge to her credit card. A hotel, cheap and tucked away in a less than reputable part of the city. Megan's heart skipped a beat. She had her lead. Without hesitating, she pulled out of the parking lot, her destination clear. The city blurred by as she sped through the streets, weaving between cars, her mind fixated on the idea of finally confronting Kate. The rain had picked up again, creating a curtain of water that Megan barely noticed. The drive felt long, the minutes ticking away too slowly, but eventually, she arrived at the hotel. It was as run down as she had imagined. The neon sign flickered, casting a dim, sickly glow over the entrance. The parking lot was half empty, littered with puddles reflecting the dull light. Megan stepped out of her car, the rain instantly soaking her as she crossed to the lobby. Inside, the air was stale, the furniture worn and faded. A bored-looking clerk sat behind the desk, barely glancing up as Megan entered. She approached the counter, her voice cold and commanding. "A woman checked in here recently. She has a baby. I need to know which room she's in." The clerk raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "I don't just give out information like that." Megan's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking. I know she's here. Just tell me the room number." The clerk hesitated, then shrugged, clearly not interested in a fight. "Room 209, second floor." Without another word, Megan turned and headed for the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. Room 209. It was just a few steps away now. When she reached the second floor, the hallway stretched before her, long and dimly lit. The sound of the rain outside echoed in the silence as she made her way to the room. She stood in front of the door for a moment, her hand hovering just above the wood, her thoughts racing. What would she find on the other side? Would Kate even be there? Or would this be another disappointment, another lead that went nowhere? Taking a deep breath, Megan knocked. There was a long pause, and for a moment, she thought no one would answer. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. Kate stood there, her eyes wide with shock, holding the baby close to her chest. She looked tired, worn down, as if she hadn't slept in days. But more than that, she looked afraid. "Megan," Kate whispered, stepping back as if to shield herself and the baby. "What are you doing here?" Megan didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We need to talk," she said, her voice hard. "I've been looking for you. The police are looking for you. You've been using my card, and I want to know why." Kate's face crumpled with a mix of guilt and fear. She opened the door wider, motioning for Megan to come inside. The room was small, the air thick with the scent of dampness. The baby whimpered softly in Kate's arms, and Megan couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Kate said, her voice trembling as she sat down on the edge of the bed. I didn't know what else to do." Megan stayed standing, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on Kate. "What are you talking about?" Kate looked up at her, tears welling in her eyes. "That man you saw on the footage, he's dangerous. He's been following me for months. He found me after I used your card to get a hotel room, and then he took it. He said if I didn't give it to him, he'd hurt my baby." Megan's heart tightened. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but she still wasn't sure whether to believe her. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Megan asked, her voice softer now, though still laced with suspicion. "Why run?" "I tried," Kate said, her voice breaking. "But he has connections. He always finds me. I thought if I could just get far enough away, but it doesn't matter. He always knows where I am." Megan frowned, her mind racing. This wasn't what she had expected. Kate wasn't the con artist she had imagined. She was trapped, desperate, trying to protect her child from something far worse than Megan had realized. For the first time, Megan sat down, her tone shifting from accusation to concern. "Who is he, Kate? What does he want?" Kate shook her head, her arms tightening around the baby. "I don't know everything. He uses people. He finds women like me, vulnerable, and he controls us. He takes everything we have. And now he has your card, Megan. He's using you too. Megan's stomach churned at the thought of being pulled into something so dark, so twisted. But now, it was personal. She couldn't walk away from this. Not anymore. We're going to stop him, Megan said, her voice firm. We'll figure this out together. Kate looked at her, hope flickering behind the fear in her eyes. You'll help me? Megan nodded, a fire igniting in her chest. I'm not letting him get away with this. Not with my card and not with you. As the rain pounded against the windows, Megan and Kate sat together in that dingy room, united by fear but driven by something stronger, a shared determination to fight back. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a new resolve had taken root. The air inside the small hotel room was stifling, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Megan sat across from Kate, her mind racing as the reality of the situation sank in. The baby had finally drifted to sleep, the soft rise and fall of its tiny chest the only peaceful thing in the room. But peace was the last thing Megan felt. So, let me get this straight, Megan began, her voice low but sharp. This man, whoever he is, has been following you for months, and you never thought to tell anyone? Kate flinched, her eyes dropping to the floor. I tried. I swear I did. But every time I think I'm safe, he shows up again. It's like he's always one step ahead of me. She bit her lip, her fingers gripping the edge of the blanket wrapped around her baby. I didn't know what else to do. Megan leaned forward, her gaze unrelenting. And you didn't think using my card would make things worse? How long did you think you could keep running before everything collapsed? Kate's shoulders slumped. I didn't have a choice, Megan. I was desperate. I thought, maybe if I stayed under the radar long enough, he'd lose interest. But he never does. Her voice cracked, and she wiped a tear from her cheek, refusing to look at Megan. You don't know what it's like, living like this. Always afraid, always looking over your shoulder. Megan felt her anger waver, replaced by a flicker of understanding. This wasn't about fraud or betrayal anymore. It was about survival. She sighed, rubbing her temples as the tension built inside her. Okay, let's focus, she said, shifting her tone. What do you know about him? Give me something to work with. Kate shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. Not much. He keeps everything about himself hidden. No real name, no trail. He's smart, careful, but I know he's part of something bigger. He's not just a predator. He's connected to people. Dangerous people. Megan frowned, her mind already assembling the pieces. Do you know what he wants? Money, control, something else? Kate hesitated, her arms tightening around the baby. Control. That's always what it's about. He doesn't need the money. He has plenty of ways to get that. But he likes having power over people. He finds women like me, ones with nowhere to go, and uses us. We're disposable to him. Megan felt a chill run down her spine. And now he has my card. What does that mean for me? Kate looked up at her, her eyes filled with guilt. He'll try to use you too, Megan. You're valuable. Your connections, your position. He'll find a way to exploit that. He already has your financials. It's only a matter of time before he comes after more. The room fell silent as Megan absorbed the full weight of Kate's words. This wasn't just about Kate anymore. This man, whoever he was, had set his sights on Megan too. She could feel the walls closing in, the control she had always prided herself on slipping through her fingers. But Megan wasn't the type to surrender to fear. She'd built her entire career on fighting back, on facing impossible odds and coming out on top. And she wasn't about to let some shadowy criminal dismantle her life piece by piece. I'm not going to let him take anything from me, Megan said, her voice cold with resolve. Or from you. Kate's breath hitched, as if she hadn't expected Megan's sudden determination. You mean that? Megan met her gaze, her blue eyes hard. I don't make promises lightly, Kate. But if we're going to stop him, I need you to be completely honest with me. No more secrets. No more running. We face this head-on together. Kate's face softened, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. I don't want to run anymore. I'm tired of it. Megan nodded. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start digging into this man, find out who he really is. And while I'm doing that, you and your baby stay close. I don't want you wandering off again. Kate swallowed, her voice small. Where will we go? I can't go back to the shelters. It's too easy for him to find us there. Megan thought for a moment, her mind racing through the possibilities. Her life was about to get a lot more complicated, but she wasn't going to let Kate and her child fall into the same cycle of fear again. You'll stay with me, she said firmly. Kate's eyes widened. With you? Are you sure? Megan stood, her decision already made. Yes, it's the safest place for now. I have security, resources, and I can keep an eye on you. You're not alone in this anymore, Kate. For the first time in what felt like hours, Kate smiled. A small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. Thank you, Megan. I don't know what I'd do without you. Megan nodded, but her mind was already miles ahead, planning her next move. We're going to stop him, she repeated, more to herself than to Kate. And when we do, he's going to regret ever thinking he could get away with this. The rain outside had eased, but the storm inside Megan was just beginning. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore, confined to the cold rules of the courtroom. This was personal now, and Megan Parker didn't lose when things got personal. As they left the hotel, a new partnership had been forged, a bond not out of trust, but necessity. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. Megan and Kate were no longer prey. They were ready to fight back. Megan drove through the rain-soaked streets, her jaw tight with focus. The city lights blurred past, the neon reflections shimmering in the puddles below. Beside her, Kate sat quietly in the passenger seat, her baby nestled against her chest. The silence in the car was heavy, filled with the weight of the unknown. They were headed to Megan's apartment, a place where she hoped they would be safe for the night. But Megan's mind was already racing ahead, mapping out the next steps. As they neared her building, the conversation from earlier played over and over in her head. Kate's words had been haunting. A man who controlled, who manipulated people's lives in the shadows. And now, somehow, he had set his sights on her. Megan had faced her share of adversaries in the courtroom. Sharks in suits, corporate giants, politicians. But this was different. It was personal, and the stakes were higher than ever. The car rolled to a stop in front of Megan's sleek apartment building. The doorman opened the door as she stepped out, nodding respectfully as she guided Kate inside. They moved swiftly through the lobby, the warm air a stark contrast to the cold night outside. Megan's penthouse was secure, and she felt a small sense of relief as they entered the elevator and began the slow ascent to the top floor. When the doors slid open, Megan led Kate into the apartment, a minimalist, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline. Kate looked around, eyes wide, clearly out of place in such luxury. You can stay here as long as you need, Megan said, her voice steady. But we need to be smart. This man, whoever he is, knows too much already. I need to get ahead of him. Kate nodded, still clutching the baby, her gaze downcast. I never meant for you to get involved like this, she whispered. Megan waved off the apology, already moving toward her desk. She needed information. She needed leverage. It's done. Now we deal with it. She pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys as she accessed her resources. She had contacts, private investigators, security experts, people who specialized in the kind of underworld this man operated in. As the screen flickered to life, Megan felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. This was her element where she thrived. Solving puzzles, taking control of impossible situations. She would find out who this man was, and she would stop him before he could get any closer. Megan, Kate's voice broke through her thoughts. Megan looked up, seeing the fear etched into the other woman's face. What if he's already watching us? For a moment, Megan hesitated. She didn't want to scare Kate further, but she couldn't lie either. It's possible, she admitted. But if he's smart, he won't make a move until he's sure of his control. Right now, we're one step ahead. We have time to figure this out. Kate nodded, though her eyes betrayed her anxiety. She sat down on the couch, rocking her baby gently as if trying to soothe herself just as much as the child. Megan glanced back at her laptop, her mind working in overdrive. Every move she made had to be calculated. She needed to anticipate the next step. Hours passed, the sound of rain still drumming lightly against the windows. Megan had been buried in her research, cross-referencing names, and looking through security footage. The man from the electronics store loomed large in her mind. He was the key, she was sure of it. But as she dug deeper, a cold realization settled over her. This wasn't just about Kate. The pattern was too perfect, too clean. Megan scrolled through the information she had gathered. Women who had disappeared, financial records that led to dead ends, untraceable aliases. This man, whoever he was, had been doing this for a long time. But now Megan was on his radar, and he had gone too far. He wasn't just controlling Kate. He was setting a trap for Megan too. Her breath caught in her throat as the full weight of the situation hit her. The credit card, the fraudulent purchases, the escalating involvement. It was all designed to pull her in, to make her vulnerable. And now, with Kate in her home, it was clear the trap had been set. But what was his endgame? Control? Blackmail? Something worse? Megan stood abruptly, pacing the room, her heart pounding. She was in deeper than she'd realized. He had orchestrated everything, playing them both like pawns in a game neither of them fully understood. And now, she had to figure out how to outmaneuver him. Kate looked up, startled by Megan's sudden movement. "What is it? What did you find?" Megan stopped, turning to face her. "This wasn't an accident, Kate. He's been planning this. The card, the purchases, you showing up, it was all part of his plan. And now he has us exactly where he wants us." Kate's face paled. "What do we do?" "We fight back," Megan said, her voice cold and determined. "He thinks he can trap us, but he's underestimated me. He doesn't know who he's dealing with." Kate swallowed hard, the tension in the room thickening. "What's the plan?" Megan crossed back to her desk, grabbing her phone. "I have a few calls to make. I'm going to find out who this guy is, and when I do, we'll take him down. But for now, we need to be careful. Don't leave the apartment. Don't answer any calls or messages that aren't from me. We can't give him any more advantages." Kate nodded, her arms tightening around the baby. Megan's heart softened slightly at the sight, but she quickly pushed the emotion aside. There was no room for sentimentality now, not when they were being hunted. She made the first call to a private investigator she trusted, laying out the situation in precise detail. Then another to a security expert who could sweep her apartment for any signs of surveillance. Every move was calculated, every decision deliberate. She was pulling in every resource she had, preparing for the fight ahead. As the night deepened, the sense of danger loomed larger. But Megan wasn't the type to back down. She had faced powerful enemies before, but this was different. This wasn't about winning a case or defending a client. This was about survival. And she would survive. She would make sure Kate did too. The rain continued to fall, but inside, Megan's resolve only grew stronger. The trap had been set, but she wasn't the one who was going to be caught. The next morning dawned gray and heavy with tension. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the oppressive weight of the storm still hung in the air. Megan had barely slept. Her mind raced with strategies and countermoves, trying to anticipate what their enemy might do next. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. He was playing a game of psychological warfare, and they were deep in his web. Megan sat at her kitchen counter, staring at her phone. Calls had been made, investigations set in motion, but the waiting, the not knowing, was gnawing at her. She wasn't used to being out of control, but this man, this predator, thrived in the shadows, manipulating from a distance. She could feel his presence everywhere, like an invisible hand pushing her closer to the edge. Kate was in the living room, cradling her baby as she rocked back and forth on the couch. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, the dark circles beneath them evidence of the fear that had taken root. The baby, mercifully, slept through the tension that filled the apartment. Megan's phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. She snatched it up, her heart quickening when she saw the name on the screen. "Detective Harris," she greeted, her voice sharp with anticipation. "What did you find?" "Not as much as we'd hoped," came the detective's gruff reply. "This guy's slippery. He's got layers of fake identities and dead ends. But we did trace some of the purchases to a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It's a storage facility, nothing flashy, but it's registered under one of the aliases we've been tracking. We're headed there now to see if we can find anything that'll give us more of a lead." Megan stood up, pacing the length of her kitchen. "I'm coming with you." "Parker, that's not a good idea," Harris warned. "This guy's dangerous. You should stay put and let us handle it." She clenched her jaw, her mind already made up. "This man has been targeting me and Kate for days. I'm not sitting back and waiting for him to make his next move. I'm coming." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Harris sighed. "Fine, but stay close to us and don't do anything reckless." Megan hung up, her pulse racing. She crossed into the living room, her eyes locking onto Kate's. "We have a lead. The police found a place connected to him. I'm going with them." Kate's face paled. "Megan, no. You can't go. What if he's waiting for you? What if it's a trap?" "It probably is," Megan admitted, grabbing her coat. "But if I don't go, we'll never get ahead of him. He'll keep controlling the situation, and I'm done letting him pull the strings." Kate stood up, panic flashing in her eyes. "But what if something happens to you? What if you—" Megan placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "I'm not going to let him win, Kate. Not with you, not with me. I'll be careful, but this has to end. We can't keep living like this." Kate bit her lip, glancing at her baby before looking back at Megan. "Please, just come back." "I will," Megan promised, her voice steady. "Stay here. Keep the doors locked. I've set the alarm, and the security system is online. No one's getting in." With that, Megan turned and headed out the door, her heart pounding with the weight of what was coming. She had no illusions about what this man was capable of, but she had faced worse odds before, and she wasn't about to back down now. The drive to the warehouse was a blur of gray skies and slick streets. Megan's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, strategies, and worst-case scenarios. When she arrived, Detective Harris and a few other officers were already there, their cars parked discreetly in the shadows. The warehouse loomed ahead, cold, industrial, and silent. A perfect place to hide secrets. Harris met her by her car, his expression serious. "You sure you're up for this?" Megan gave him a sharp nod. "I'm here. Let's go." They moved quietly toward the entrance, the officers spreading out to cover all exits. Harris led the way, his gun drawn, as they entered the building. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the stacks of crates and boxes. The silence was deafening, the kind that made every creak of the floorboards sound like a gunshot. Megan's eyes scanned the room, her senses on high alert. She could feel it, the danger, the tension. He was here, somewhere in the darkness, watching, waiting. Harris motioned for one of the officers to check a side room while he continued forward with Megan. The two of them moved carefully, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. Megan's heart pounded in her chest, each second stretching out longer than the last. Suddenly, a noise, a faint scuffling sound, came from the far side of the warehouse. Harris froze, his hand up to signal the others. Megan's breath caught in her throat as she strained to see through the shadows. And then, without warning, the lights went out. The warehouse was plunged into darkness, and a cold dread settled over Megan. She heard the officers muttering, fumbling for flashlights. But before anyone could react, a voice, low, smooth, and taunting, echoed through the room. "Welcome, Ms. Parker." Megan's blood ran cold. It was him. "You've been playing this game so well," the voice continued, a hint of amusement in the words. "But you never really had a chance, did you?" Harris cursed under his breath, waving for his men to spread out. Megan's pulse thundered in her ears, her mind racing. He was here, somewhere in the dark, watching them like prey. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. "I should thank you," the voice said, moving closer. "You made this so much more interesting, so much more personal." Megan's hands shook with a mixture of fear and fury. She wanted to lash out, to scream, but she held herself back. This was what he wanted, to make her afraid, to make her lose control. But Megan Parker didn't lose control. She took a slow, steadying breath, her mind sharpening like a blade. "I'm not afraid of you," she called out, her voice strong and unwavering. A chuckle echoed through the dark. "You should be." And then, just as suddenly as the lights had gone out, a loud crash reverberated through the warehouse, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Megan spun around, her heart racing as Harris and the officers rushed toward the noise. "Stay close," Harris shouted as they moved, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Megan followed, her adrenaline spiking. The chase was on. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted through the darkened warehouse, the beams of the officers' flashlights cutting through the inky blackness ahead. The air was thick with dust, swirling in the dim light, making it harder to see. The adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her senses as she strained to hear the footsteps of their unseen enemy. Harris was close by, his flashlight steady as he gestured for his men to split up and fan out, their boots echoing against the cold concrete. Megan stayed close to him, her mind racing as she fought to keep her emotions in check. The voice from the darkness still echoed in her ears, taunting, chilling, playing on her deepest fears. They moved deeper into the warehouse, the sound of running footsteps growing fainter as the man slipped farther into the maze of crates and boxes. But Megan wasn't about to let him disappear again, not after coming this far. She had to catch him. She had to end this. Suddenly, a loud crash reverberated from the far side of the building, followed by the unmistakable sound of metal clattering to the ground. Megan froze, her breath catching in her throat. She exchanged a quick glance with Harris, who nodded sharply. They both sprinted toward the noise, the light from their flashlights bouncing wildly as they navigated the cluttered space. They rounded a corner just in time to see a shadowed figure darting behind a stack of crates, moving with the agility of someone who knew the layout well. Harris cursed under his breath, signaling to the other officers to close in from the opposite direction. Megan could feel the weight of every second slipping away, the tension ratcheting higher as they closed the distance. "Stop!" Harris shouted, his voice echoing through the empty space. But the figure didn't stop. Instead, a mocking laugh echoed through the darkness, sending a chill down Megan's spine. He was toying with them, just as he had been all along. Megan clenched her fists, fury boiling beneath her calm exterior. She was tired of being hunted, tired of feeling powerless. With a sudden burst of determination, she broke away from Harris, sprinting toward the side of the warehouse, where she knew there was another exit. If she could cut him off, she might have a chance to confront him. Her lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, the sound of her footsteps drowned out by the pounding of her heartbeat. She rounded a corner and skidded to a halt, her breath catching in her throat. There he was. The man stood at the far end of the warehouse, his face obscured by the shadows, but Megan could feel his eyes on her, watching, calculating. He was tall, his frame imposing as he leaned casually against a stack of boxes, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them was charged, thick with unspoken threats. Megan's pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced herself to stay calm, her hands steady at her sides. This was it, the moment she had been chasing, the moment she would finally get answers. "You've been running for a long time," Megan called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her. "But it ends now." The man chuckled, a low, sinister sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "You think you're in control here, Miss Parker?" he asked, his voice smooth and cold. "You're not. You've been playing right into my hands from the beginning." Megan's jaw tightened, her mind racing as she tried to decipher his game. "You wanted me to come here," she said, stepping closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Why? What's your endgame?" The man straightened, stepping out from the shadows. His face was hard, cold, everything about him calculated. "It was never about Kate," he said, his gaze locking onto hers. "It's about you. You're the prize, Megan. You've always been the prize." Her heart lurched in her chest as the pieces began to fall into place. He had orchestrated everything, the card, the purchases, the chase. All of it had been designed to pull her in, to make her vulnerable. And now, here she was, exactly where he wanted her. "You've been using Kate this whole time," Megan said, her voice sharp with anger. "Manipulating her, using her to get to me." She was a means to an end, the man replied coolly. You, on the other hand, you're something far more valuable. Megan's pulse raced as she fought to keep her composure. She had to stay calm, had to think clearly if she was going to get out of this. But every instinct was screaming at her to run, to get as far away from him as possible. You think you can control me, she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. You think I'm just going to let you win? The man's smile widened, cold and menacing. You don't have a choice, Megan. You walked into this willingly. And now you're mine. The words sent a bolt of terror through her, but she refused to let it show. She took another step forward, her eyes blazing with determination. I'm not yours, and I'm not afraid of you. For the first time, the man's expression faltered, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual icy control. You should be, he said softly, taking a step toward her. Because this is just the beginning. Before Megan could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps shattered the tension. Harris and the officers burst around the corner, their flashlights sweeping over the scene. Freeze, Harris shouted, his gun raised as he advanced toward the man. But in the split second that followed, the man moved with lightning speed, disappearing into the shadows once again. Harris and the officers rushed after him, but Megan knew. It was too late. He was gone. The officers fanned out, searching the area, but Megan stood frozen, her mind racing. She had come so close, but the confrontation had only raised more questions. Who was he? What did he want from her? And how far would he go to get it? As Harris approached, his face set in grim determination, Megan finally allowed herself to breathe. This isn't over, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Harris nodded, his eyes narrowing. No, it's just beginning. Megan sat in the back of the police car, the city lights blurring past as they sped back toward her apartment. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, racing over every word the man had said in the warehouse, every taunt that had cut deep into her mind. You're the prize, Megan. The chilling revelation that she, not Kate, had been his target all along rattled her to the core. The car pulled up in front of her building, and Harris, grim-faced, opened the door. You sure you want to go back in there tonight? He asked, his voice rough with concern. Megan nodded, her resolve hardening. I have to. Kate's in there. I can't leave her alone. Harris hesitated, but then relented, knowing there was no arguing with her when she had made up her mind. We'll have officers posted outside, just in case. But be careful, Parker. This guy's not done. Megan stepped out of the car, the weight of the night pressing down on her shoulders, but she forced herself to stay focused. As she approached the door, her breath quickened. The man had been inside her head, laying traps and leading her into a labyrinth she hadn't realized she was walking into. Now, everything felt fragile, like the pieces of her life were teetering on the edge, waiting to shatter. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the sleek furniture. Kate sat on the couch, her face pale and drawn, the baby resting in her lap. She looked up the moment Megan entered, her eyes filled with fear. Megan? Kate's voice trembled, her grip tightening on the baby. What happened? Did you find him? Megan crossed the room quickly, her heart still pounding from the confrontation. He got away, she said, her voice low but steady. But it's worse than we thought. He wasn't just after you, Kate. He's been targeting me. This whole time. Kate's eyes widened in shock. You? But why? Megan swallowed hard, her hands curling into fists at her sides as she pieced together everything. He's been playing a long game. I don't know exactly why yet, but it's personal. He's been watching me, manipulating things from behind the scenes. Kate shivered, her face etched with horror. He's dangerous, Megan. What if he comes here? What if he won't? Megan cut in, her voice firm. We have officers stationed outside, and I've upgraded the security. We're safe for tonight, but we can't stay hidden forever. We need to figure out what he wants, and we need to do it fast. Kate nodded, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. Megan sat down beside her, running a hand through her hair as she tried to think. Every move the man had made, every step he had taken, It all led back to her. He had orchestrated this entire nightmare to pull her into his trap, but there was still something missing, a piece of the puzzle she couldn't quite see. Suddenly, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Megan grabbed it off the table, her heart leaping into her throat when she saw the number on the screen. It was her investigator. "Tell me you found something," Megan said, her voice sharp with urgency. The investigator's voice crackled on the other end, weary but alert. "I did. I've been digging into the guy's aliases, and I found a connection I didn't expect. His real name is Marcus Hale. Ring a bell?" Megan's blood ran cold. The name hit her like a punch to the gut, dredging up memories she had buried long ago. Marcus Hale. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since. Her breath caught in her throat. "He was a client," she whispered, the realization crashing down on her. "Years ago. One of my first big cases." Kate looked at her, confused, but Megan was already on her feet, pacing the room as the memories flooded back. Marcus Hale had been a corporate executive, a wealthy man caught up in a high-stakes legal battle. Megan had represented him, fought for him, won the case. But she had sensed something off about him even then. Something dark beneath the surface. "What happened?" Kate asked, her voice soft and tentative. Megan shook her head, her mind spinning. "I won the case, but after that, things fell apart for him. He lost his company. His life crumbled. I didn't think it was my fault. He made bad decisions. But maybe he blames me for what happened." The investigator's voice came through the phone again. "He's been off the grid for years, Parker. After his downfall, he disappeared. It looks like he's been rebuilding, using different identities, pulling strings from the shadows. And now he's come after you." Megan's stomach twisted. It all made sense now. Marcus Hale had been waiting, plotting his revenge, using Kate to draw her in. The trap had been set from the moment she handed over her credit card. Every move she had made had played right into his hands. "We have to stop him," Megan said, her voice tight with anger. "Before he tries to finish what he started." "I'll keep digging," the investigator promised. "But be careful. This guy's dangerous." Megan hung up, her mind racing as she turned to Kate. "It's him, Marcus Hale. He's been using you to get to me." Kate's face paled, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, Megan. I didn't know." "It's not your fault," Megan said quickly, kneeling down in front of her. "You didn't know what he was planning. But now we do. And we're going to stop him." The tension in the room was suffocating, but Megan forced herself to think clearly. She wasn't going to let Marcus Hale destroy her. Not after everything she had fought for. This was her life, and she was taking it back. "We have to be smart about this," Megan said, standing up, her voice filled with determination. "He's watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. But if we can stay one step ahead, we can turn the tables on him." Kate nodded, her fear still evident, but laced with a flicker of hope. "What do we do now?" Megan's eyes hardened. "We go on the offensive. We make him think he's still in control, but we take the fight to him. He wants a game? Fine. We'll give him one." For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Megan felt a surge of confidence. Marcus Hale might have thought he could break her, but he was wrong. She had faced powerful men before, and she had taken them down. And now, it was his turn. The night air was thick with tension, as if the very city itself was holding its breath. Megan stood at the window of her apartment, gazing out at the glimmering skyline. The lights of New York stretched endlessly before her, but she felt the weight of the darkness pressing in. Somewhere out there, Marcus Hale was watching, waiting for her next move. He thought he had won, thought he could manipulate her like a pawn in his twisted game. But this time, Megan was ready. Behind her, Kate sat quietly on the couch, her baby nestled against her chest, fast asleep. The fear in Kate's eyes had softened slightly, replaced with a fragile hope that Megan could feel in the room. It was time to end this. Megan's phone buzzed in her hand, breaking the heavy silence. She glanced down at the screen. It was the investigator. She took a breath and answered. "We've tracked him," the investigator said, his voice low and urgent. "He's holed up in an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. It looks like he's been using it as a base of operations for years. I sent you the location." Megan felt a cold, calm determination settle over her. This was it. The final piece. Is he alone? She asked. From what we can tell, yes. But be careful. He's unpredictable. Megan hung up, her pulse quickening. She turned to Kate, who was watching her with wide eyes, fear flickering just beneath the surface. This ends tonight, Megan said, her voice steady. Hale's cornered. He's been playing us, but now we know where he is. Kate looked down at her baby, then back at Megan. What if he tries to hurt you? Megan crossed the room, kneeling in front of Kate. He won't get that chance. I'm going to finish this. For you. For both of us. Kate nodded, her expression a mix of gratitude and fear. Please be careful. Megan stood, grabbing her coat and slipping her phone into her pocket. She had made all the necessary calls. Harris and his team were already mobilizing, ready to move in, but this confrontation was personal. It had to be her who ended it. I'll come back, Megan promised, meeting Kate's gaze. Lock the door behind me. Don't let anyone in. Without another word, Megan left the apartment, her footsteps quick and sure as she made her way to her car. The drive through the city was tense, the streets eerily quiet as she navigated toward the outskirts. Her mind raced with thoughts of the confrontation to come, but she pushed the fear aside. She had faced worse before, powerful men, corrupt corporations. Marcus Hale was just another obstacle, and she knew how to take him down. The abandoned building loomed ahead as Megan pulled up, parking discreetly out of sight. The place was a decrepit shell, crumbling walls and broken windows casting jagged shadows in the moonlight. She could see Harris and his team stationed nearby, ready to move in, but she signaled for them to hold back. She needed to face Hale alone. Megan slipped inside, the air thick with dust and the smell of decay. The building was silent, but she could feel the presence of Hale, lurking somewhere in the darkness, waiting for her. She moved carefully, her senses on high alert, her breath steady as she navigated the maze of hallways. And then she heard it, a soft, mocking chuckle that echoed through the empty space. Megan's heart quickened, but she didn't falter. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Miss Parker. Hale's voice called out from the shadows, cold and taunting. Coming here alone, brave, but foolish. Megan stepped into the center of the room, her eyes scanning the darkness. I'm not here to play games, Hale, she said, her voice hard. It's over. Hale emerged from the shadows, his figure tall and imposing, the smirk on his face as cold as ice. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. You think you've outsmarted me? Hale asked, his tone dripping with amusement. You've been dancing to my tune from the start. Everything you've done has led you right here, right where I want you. Megan's hands clenched into fists, but she forced herself to stay calm. I know who you are now, Marcus. I know what you've done, and this is where it ends. Hale's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with malice. You still don't get it, do you? This was never about revenge. It was about control. You're powerful, Megan, but even you have weaknesses. I've seen them, and now, I own you. Megan's pulse pounded in her ears, but she kept her gaze locked on his. You don't own me, she said, her voice steady. You've never owned me. For a moment, there was silence. Hale's expression darkened, his confidence wavering. He took a step toward her, his posture menacing. You've already lost. Megan's jaw tightened, her mind racing. She could see it now, the cracks in Hale's facade, the desperation hiding beneath his arrogance. He was unraveling, and she was going to use it against him. I'm not the one who's lost, Megan said, her voice calm and unshaken. You've spent years hiding in the shadows, but it's over. The police are outside, Hale. This is the end of the line. Hale's eyes widened in surprise, but the momentary shock was quickly replaced with fury. You think I'm afraid of the police? He snarled, his voice low and dangerous. You think I'll let you take me down? Megan held his gaze, her voice unwavering. You have two options, surrender, or spend the rest of your life running. Either way, I win. For a moment, the room was thick with tension, both of them standing still, locked in a battle of wills. And then, just as Hale's hand twitched toward his pocket, Megan heard the sound of boots crashing through the doorway behind her. Harris and his team swarmed the room, guns drawn. surrounding Hale before he could make a move. Hale froze, his eyes darting from Megan to the officers, the fight draining from his posture. "It's over, Hale," Megan repeated, her voice firm and resolute. Hale's shoulders sagged in defeat, and the officers moved in, cuffing him as Harris approached Megan, his face grim but relieved. "You did it," Harris said quietly. Megan nodded, her breath finally releasing as the weight of the night lifted. It was over. Marcus Hale was finished. As the officers led Hale away, Megan stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air. The city stretched out before her, vast and alive. But for the first time in days, the tension had lifted. She had one. She pulled out her phone, dialing Kate's number. The line picked up after the first ring. "Megan?" Kate's voice was shaky. "It's over," Megan said softly. "You're safe now. We're safe." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Megan smiled. Megan stood outside the apartment building, her breath fogging in the cool night air. The chaos of Marcus Hale's arrest was behind her, but the tension still lingered in her chest. The city buzzed quietly around her, but it felt distant, almost surreal. The danger, the constant feeling of being watched, had lifted. Yet, there was a quiet part of her that knew this wasn't over. Not completely. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She had survived. Kate had survived. That was all that mattered now. With steady resolve, Megan headed back inside, her footsteps echoing softly in the empty hallway. When she reached the door of her apartment, she paused for a moment, collecting herself before pushing it open. The warm light from inside spilled into the corridor, a stark contrast to the darkened city outside. She stepped in quietly, shutting the door behind her. Kate was in the living room, sitting on the couch, her baby still asleep in her arms. Her eyes, wide and haunted, flickered up when she saw Megan enter. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The weight of everything they had been through hung in the air. "It's done," Megan said softly, her voice steady but low. "Hale's in custody. He won't hurt you anymore." Kate exhaled, her shoulders sagging in relief. But there was something else in her eyes, a lingering fear, a doubt that had been etched too deeply to simply vanish with the news. She gently stroked the baby's head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe it's really over." Megan sat down beside her, her own exhaustion starting to catch up to her. The adrenaline from the confrontation had finally drained, leaving behind a quiet ache in her chest. "It's not going to be easy," Megan admitted, her voice soft. "There's still so much to figure out. But for now, you're safe." "We both are." Kate nodded, though her expression remained distant, her thoughts elsewhere. "I didn't think I'd make it through this. I thought I'd lose everything." Megan's eyes softened. She reached out, resting a hand on Kate's arm, a gesture of quiet reassurance. "You didn't lose. You fought, Kate. You kept fighting. That's why you're still here." The room fell into a gentle stillness. Outside, the rain had begun again, softly tapping against the window. It was the same kind of rain that had brought them together. On that dark, stormy night when Megan had first found Kate and her baby huddled in the cold. So much had happened since then. So much had changed. But through all the fear and the danger, they had survived. Together. After a long moment, Kate spoke again, her voice hesitant but grateful. "I don't know how to thank you, Megan. You saved us. You saved me." Megan shook her head, her expression calm but resolute. "We saved each other. You made me see things differently, in ways I wasn't ready for." She paused, her gaze distant for a moment as she reflected on everything they had endured. "I've spent my whole life in control, always knowing the next step. But this changed me." Kate looked at her, seeing the vulnerability in Megan's eyes for the first time. "You didn't have to help me. You could have walked away." "I couldn't," Megan said simply, her voice soft but firm. "I saw you, and I couldn't just let it go. You deserved a chance. So did your baby." Tears welled up in Kate's eyes, but she wiped them away quickly, trying to stay composed. "You gave me that chance," she whispered. The silence between them was thick with unspoken emotions. Megan leaned back on the couch, her body finally relaxing for the first time in days. She had been through battles in court, fought against corporate giants, and won wars with words. But this fight, the one for survival, for her own humanity, had been the hardest of all. For a long while, they sat there, the two of them, letting the weight of the night settle. The baby stirred slightly in Kate's arms, but didn't wake. The rain outside continued, steady and calming, a gentle reminder that life moved forward, even after the storm. Eventually, Megan stood up, stretching the stiffness from her muscles. She looked down at Kate, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Get some rest," she said gently. "You need it." Kate nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "What about you?" Megan gave a small shrug. "I'll try to sleep." "Maybe." But as Megan moved toward her bedroom, she knew sleep would be difficult. There was still too much on her mind. Questions that hadn't been answered, loose ends that needed tying. Marcus Hale might have been captured, but his reach, his influence, lingered in the shadows. And Megan wasn't one to let things go unfinished. As she lay down in the dark, the sounds of the city humming faintly in the background, her thoughts drifted. She couldn't shake the feeling that something else was coming. Another challenge, another twist. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself a small victory. Because she had one. They had one. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight, Megan Parker let herself rest, knowing that she had fought for more than just survival. She had fought for her own redemption, for the chance to reclaim the part of herself that had been lost in the chaos of her ambition. And that, in the end, was worth everything. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story about overcoming challenges and family love, don't forget to like the video, comment on what touched you the most, and subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for our next exciting story.